All right, exciting day for me, John. When I started this podcast, it's been about 3 years ago. I had set up a list of people I'd love to have on when it looked like a guest centric approach would work for me. Trust me, nobody wants to listen to me talk for a half hour. I started putting a list together. John, you were way up on the list. It has taken a little bit of time, but I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. So I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, Doug, and I'm sorry it took so long.
Hey, no problems. Let's get right into it. John, if for somebody that wouldn't know, well, like one of these an alien drop down situations, what's the best way to describe what a reporter is?
Oh man, um, that's an interesting question, and I'm almost kind of a middleman, but especially like in this beat where you're relaying information to the fan base from the team, but you're not a conduit of the, you're not a an arm of the team. You're a reporter trying to let people know what's going on in an honest way. So you should be like an honest truth teller, if nothing else. Gatherer of information, right? I think that's what it is, and it's not always pretty, as anybody who's followed this team knows. It's not always pretty information, but but you want it to be accurate information and an honest assessment of what's going on. So I don't know if that answers the question well, but because I hadn't given it much thought, but I do. We're not a voice of the fan, because that's not what we're here for. We're not just doing it, but we are trying to relate to the fans as an honest way as possible about what's going on and with whom.
I think you're one of the few on this beat that didn't grow up in the area. You're an Ohio guy. Is there a benefit to being a local guy? Is there a benefit to being not having been a fan of the team other than reporting on it? Is there a difference between the two? Is there one way easier than the other?
I'd say yes, there's a benefit, and yes, there's a benefit to being
Mhm.
in or out of the market. Yeah, and I think you can only fall back on your own experience. I will say I like being out from outside the market, because I don't come in with any sort of, like I had grown up in Cleveland. If I had covered the Browns, you have to get past that fandom from when you were growing up. I'd have to get past sitting in the stands watching Elway pick them apart on the drive. And you know what I mean? Like, you have to lose that. And it's hard. It can be hard. Not impossible, because I know people who have done it. And once you start doing it, this is your job. Now, where you get that, the benefit is you understand the emotional roller coaster, maybe a little bit more that fans been on, because you were on it yourself. You know the history a lot deeper. So I think there is a benefit to that. So, but I will say, from being outside the market, I like it because, again, I don't come in with any attachments. I'm not here to divorce myself from when I was a fan of the team or anything like that. And I think it allows me to maybe just be a little bit more clear about what's going on. I don't have prejudices or biases from anything from the past. And again, that's to my benefit. But I do think there's a benefit. I think any situation you're in, you create your own benefits. I think as a reporter, I'm an older guy. Like, how do you get close to the players? What is your advantage there? So you find your advantage in whatever situation you're in. And because I'm from outside the market, I'll find an advantage that way. Now, having said that, because I've covered this team for so long and I've written a few books on this franchise, I feel like I've been able to get past a lot of that. I understand a lot of what the fans have gone through very well. And again, I think having grown up in Cleveland, I kind of understand there are some similarities for the heartbreak. So I understand that part very well. But I do, because I had that background and was able to do that, I think that's helped me understand even more about where this franchise was, what it's gone through, what it's been like the entire time, et cetera. So, I think you use what you find a benefit in whatever situation you're in.
When we discussed doing this podcast, I know we needed to get it done before kind of the season starts, because you really start ramping up then. I guess my next question is, what does a typical work week look like for you during the season?
Yeah. And, it's funny because there is a rhythm to it. And I think one of the things I've always liked covering the NFL is there is a rhythm to your life. Like I can tell you what I'm going to be doing on a Wednesday or Thursday next year, even. Now,
Right.
of course, that everything depends on who is the coach. Subtle things change, but you have an idea of the rhythm. So a typical, and it's Doug, it's changed over the years too, because, before when I was working for, other publications, I did a ton of work. So way back in the day, I used to, for a long time, readers of me, when I was with the Journal or the Washington Examiner, I'm going to back up for a minute. So on a Monday, we all know game day is Sunday, right? So we'll start there. So Sundays, you get to the game around 10 a.m. or so, 3 hours or so before kickoff, typically. Back in the day, there were a lot of times I'd be there till 9:30 at night because I would be doing so much stuff after the game. I'd do 10 observations. I would do this story, a sidebar, news story, this thing, that thing, whatever it took. So sometimes you're there a really long time. And then Monday, it used to be that there was always an open locker room session, whether it was an away game or a home game. You go out to Redskin Park the next day, and you'd have the open locker room session. So if you were on the road, you had to get back by 11 a.m. somehow. If that meant getting on a 5 a.m. flight after a night game, that's what you did, because you needed to be back for that. Because, back then I was still the only one covering it for my publication. So you had to be there just in case. And then you'd work, you'd have a press conference at 3. Tuesdays would be an off day. And back in the day, and I still watch a lot of the games, but back then I used to be maniacal about it. And so I would watch, I'd rewatch the game starting on Monday. I'd rewatch the TV version. And then when the all 22 would come out on a Tuesday, I would watch that. And then you'd watch specific plays again and again and again and again. And, you might watch, I want to watch the third downs again. And then you watch that. Then I'd write a report on offense, defense. And when Robert was here, went on him. Wednesday, you'd be out there and it's a big media day. And so you'd get out there, whatever the time, and you probably do some work from home, go out there, big media day. That's the first day they're all back, and watch practice, go back, right. You have open locker room sessions, et cetera. Same on Thursday, similar pace. And then Friday, you kind of taper off a little bit because you've gotten what you've needed throughout the week. To Friday during the locker room session, a lot of times it's a chance just to get to know guys and just kind of BS with guys. And it's when people always talk about like being in the locker room, it's vital for our job. And I'm glad that we're back in there because it's a way for us to get to know players and for them to get to know us. And what happens is, I think, there are times after a game, if you don't have a relationship with a player and you ask a question a certain way, they might get really annoyed because who is this guy? Right. Who is this person asking it that way? But if they get to know you, they kind of know where you're coming from. Not always, that's not always means it's going to be always pleasant, but I think they have a better understanding of us and your style. And like, hey, is this a guy that is, talking to me, or he just ignores me during the week and just come ask me all sorts of things. But it also, again, it gets to know them as a person a little bit more, because you can have more conversations about various things. And it deepens your relationship with the players and your understanding of the team, your reporting, et cetera. So that's kind of the rhythm week. And usually Saturdays either travel or maybe that's the day where you have free. So that's about the rhythm of it. Again, on Tuesdays now, because it's the players' day off, so you typically work from home. Way back in the day, we'd go out to the facility still because you'd have players coming in and out for workouts, for whatever, and maybe you catch one working out, but no, you don't do that now. We don't have the same level of access that we had before. Where our building is, it's different, so players aren't going by there anyways. So, it can be a grind, but you're covering football, for God's sake, right?
I talk to many people that talk about the grind, but always say afterwards, not that I'm complaining.
No, it's not a complaint. Yeah, it's not a complaint. It's the reality of it.
Right.
But there are pockets in the offseason that are a lot better. Like right now is a time where, and I've been off a little bit, but even when you're working now, having said that, with this franchise, sometimes in summertime you work a lot. That's where it gets harder because, you do need to separate a little bit because the hours can be a lot during the season. But again, you're covering football. And I always remind myself of that. I'll be sitting there talking to a coach that I've known for a while. I'm like, I just got paid to have a 45-minute discussion about what's the best way, about a cover 4. Right. You know what I mean? Like, okay, that's not so bad.
It's not. John, you've been in the business for a while now. Is a traditional reporter, is the way information is consumed now frustrating for you?
The way it's consumed by, let me say this. Because a lot of that is being online, correct? And just social media and all that. Social media has helped me get to where I am. I'm aware of that. Like, I toiled for a long time working at a smaller paper, and it wasn't until I feel like the internet became bigger that I think maybe I was able to open more eyes with my work. So, I feel like part of why I got to ESPN and I got to the Post first, and I feel like some of that is because of social media, whether it's, seeing stuff online, being able to see it, being able to spread your work more to more people. So I'm grateful for that. And so, in terms of that, I don't have any frustrations with that aspect, if that's what you're talking about.
Maybe also just the race to be first, I think sometimes.
Well, okay, now that's a different thing. Yes, I think that leads to a lot of sloppiness and mistakes. And we've talked about it, like some of the other reporters and I will talk about, like, you're getting beat by 5, 10, 15 seconds
right
for a transaction, and it pisses you off. I'm like, what's going on here? Right. I didn't see the same text that somebody else got at the same time. So it makes it look like you weren't first. Like, well, the goal is to have the information. So that part, yes, is very frustrating because, and I don't even know if most fans really care about that. Now, if you're always first, that's different. Right. But I do think like that part, but I think that's more of a media ego thing than anything else. And I will say, Doug, I always feel my job as a reporter, first of all, it's not to be first, it's to be accurate. Right. And there's been a lot of stuff, and I don't want to get into all this, but during the sale that I think has been very sloppy. And because people wanted to be first, and I will, like, that stuff I wasn't playing with, right? Because in this situation, you have to be accurate. And so yes, that part is frustrating, but my job, I feel, is to, whether or not you're first, you better provide a lot of good context and insight, because that's where the reporting comes. Getting a text from an agent about a guy signing somewhere is great. That's news. But can you go beyond that? Can you tell me how does this team view this player? How does he fit in with what they want to do? What is this guy's background? That's the bigger part of the reporting too. The other stuff is having relationships with agents or with coaches or teams, but can you take that next step? That's where I think, as a beat reporter, that's my job. And especially because, Doug, obviously the national guys are going to get a lot of stuff because they're national guys. That's just, people always wonder, how does the local guy not get it? Because they have, like, these agents and teams, they have relationships with these big name. That's fine. That's part of the thing. That's their job. But my job is to take you further. So if I don't get that, if I can't take you further, then I failed at my job. So that's kind of how I see it.
John, had you ever considered going nationally for the beat, leaving the beat and going national? Had you considered that?
That's a good question. And that's a different path. First of all, I like covering a team. I like covering a team with a passionate fan base. I didn't think that it was going to go the way it has the last 5 years. But I've enjoyed covering a fan and getting to know a team, a franchise, the fan base, being part of that fabric. I've always enjoyed that. I will also say, like, I haven't gone down that road, in part because it's been so demanding covering this team. And I also, I didn't want to travel every weekend to a game because I wanted to be here with my family. Not that it's not saying that others wouldn't want to be with their family, but that's what I wanted to do. And so, but I like this. I like being part of this. And I will say, like, this franchise has been difficult to cover the last few years for obvious reasons. And that wears you out. And I know it wears the fan base out. And I'm fortunate that I'm getting worn out, but I'm still getting paid to do that. So, and if the worst thing in my life is covering a chaotic franchise, I've had a pretty damn good life. But that's what wears you out, and that's what could push you on. But I like the pace of my life with this. And I like what I have covering this franchise. And, I think, to be honest, Doug, for the security in this business, covering a team is the best security. So, they need people to cover these teams. So that's, when you go in the other way, and that's great for people to do it. And I admire what they've done. They do have to sacrifice to get where they've gotten. And I have nothing but admiration for people who do that, because I know what it takes, and I know what you give up to do that as well. So, and there's a different level of pressure with it. And I feel enough internal pressure to do well that I can't imagine then extending that and multiplying it by 32. I don't know if I could take that, but I like the rhythm of my life with this. And I like covering a team. Listen, I have my podcast. I like talking about one team that this fan base is interested, and you get to know them, they get to know you. And, so I think that's, there you go.
What's the symbiotic nature of the podcast in your writing? Has the podcast made you a better writer? Has the writing made you?
Well, I'll tell you. Well,
is there a relationship between the
two? I don't know if it's made me a better writer. Maybe it. I think sometimes, because I have people on the podcast, I don't know if I'm going to use what they have for a story, but you get stuff from that. If I had on Emmanuel Forbes as position coach from Mississippi State. Well, he tells me a few things that I can now use throughout the year for stories on Emmanuel Forbes. And so you get good information that way. I think it sharpens maybe your interview skills. And I think that's one of the things which then leads to better information. And one thing that I've always done, Doug, is I like listening to good interviews. And I think as a reporter in my position, it all starts with getting good information. And when you're younger, you think a lot of people think, oh, I'm a great writer and all that. BS, man. It all comes down to the information. And, you can be this great. I could always tell when I was younger, when people were trying to write themselves out of not having any information. You're just trying to show that you're a great writer. I want a good writer with with really good information. That's a memorable story. And then you can have people like Eli Saslow at the New York Times, who does phenomenal with both. And it leaves you oh shit, I can't do anything because this guy, look at this guy. But that's a rare combo, right? That's the LeBron James territory. But I've always tried to become a better interviewer. And that a lot of times it's by listening to other good interviews. I don't care what the subject is. If it's a good interview, I like listening to it because how did that person get that information? Could I ask the question this way and maybe elicit better information? And over the years, you learn how to do that. I remember a time way back when Bruce Smith was here, and I asked him about if he was going to retire or something like that. And I think there was something like that, but I asked it, and I was obviously very young. And I asked it in a way where it's he kind of scowled a little bit at me. The next day, somebody asked him the very same question in a much different way. And I thought, oh, okay, that's how you do it. So, you use that over the years, and I tried to. So I don't know that the podcast has made me any better or worse. I think being a writer and being a reporter makes the podcast better because of the way I can interview, I think so.
I know that there are no podcasters specifically in the media scrums. Do you think we'll get to a point where there will be?
I don't think so, because I think the NFL is pretty clear where you have to work for an established outlet to be out there. Otherwise, it just gets too clogged and too crowded. And
Yeah.
there's just not enough for that. They want a certain level. I don't want to say professionalism. That'd be too arrogant, because that's not to say that someone who's podcasting couldn't be professional. I just think it's more about limiting in the room how many people are able to get out there, because you'd have a lot of people who would then, where do you then differentiate from podcast? Do you have to have over this many listeners or downloads? What? So I think it's as much about like, you have to work for an established outlet. Otherwise you can't. So I don't see that unless that podcaster is working for, if there's like, I don't know, give me another outlet where it's like, yeah, he's part of this network,
right,
of whether it's Fox and they have their own I don't know that, but right now I'd say no, because I just think, just like for a long time where if you just had a blog, could you get out there? Well, no, you had to work. There had to be meet a certain criteria to get out there, because the room would get too clogged.
I know we're running up on the time.
We got a few more minutes. Go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to just get to the team just a little bit. You've watched a lot of film over the years. Who are some people that you've watched film with that really gave you a couple aha moments?
Watch film with?
Yes.
Logan Paulson. I love watching with him, because I think he was one of the smart, when I always feel like, so I used to coach basketball, right, for a long time.
Okay.
And eventually I learned the better players I had on my team, the smarter a coach I appeared to be.
Sure.
So if I want to be a smart reporter, find the smart people in the locker room who can give me the insight because I love getting insight, and I love sharing insight into what I learned. That's one of the things I've always enjoyed about being a reporter. So when Logan was there, he was one of the best at providing that level of insight and the detail, like, I remember one time talking after a game about, the zone, the outside zone wasn't working. Why was that? And he could tell me about the intricacy of the footwork, what the defenders were doing with their footwork or where they were standing, just 6 inches.
Right.
And how hard it made it for them. And like, wow, I sound smarter because of this guy. Right. So he's one of the ones. And last year I went over to his house and watched some film with him of some things, and, just various coaches. I remember watching it with Al Saunders one time, and we were watching some preseason game footage, but it highlighted, it was Jason Campbell was there, and it highlighted how they look at it versus how we look at it. So there was a play in a preseason game where Jason completes like a 50-yard pass from their zone end zone. Great. But for the coaches, he was like, that should have been a touchdown. Because if he had thrown it, a little bit better ball, a little bit on time, whatever, he's like, that's one where you say that really should have been a touchdown. But it was still a 50-yard gain. But it was still how they look at things and how they process it. So like there've been, I was going to watch film with Emmanuel Forbes about his interceptions for touchdowns. He's like, I don't need to watch him. I remember him vividly. And he did. And I actually am playing that on my podcast on Thursday, the interview I had with them, where we just went over each interception for a touchdown and like, how did that happen? So I watched with Jahan Dodson last year about the circus catches he made in college. And I picked out like 5 or 6 in particular. And I like him being able to explain what he was doing, why, et cetera. So that was really good. And so, but yeah, over the years, there's been a few of them. And I wish that something I could do more of, because I think it gives you really good insight. And, I think one of the things by me watching a lot, people will tell you some different things because they know that you like that. And I think it leads to again, where's your advantage? Well, my advantage, not an advantage, but one thing I do is I watch that, and it allows you to go and open the door to different conversations. And so I've always liked that. So I've had coaches tell me like, yeah, I'll talk to you about this because I know you watch it.
Right. Do you think the plan was to draft Darnell Wright? Were you surprised he went that high? I know they like
No, I wasn't. I wasn't surprised because, I remember hearing before the draft, like that was the guy that I projected to them.
Okay.
And I know
Was there ever, when's the last time there was such a big riser as Darnell Wright? I mean, he flew up boards, right?
He did. I also think that the tackle class, while there were a few, it wasn't as top heavy, I think, as people think, where they were good, but I don't think there were great ones. And so if you needed one, I think somebody who was good and had some versatility like Wright did and has athleticism, that he was going to move up a little bit more. So getting close to the draft, I wasn't surprised at all that he wasn't there. Now, would they have drafted him over Forbes? Right now, they will tell you no. I can't say for sure that they wouldn't have drafted Wright instead, because listen, you draft, and I think Forbes is a good pick, but if you had drafted Wright, now you could put him at right tackle. Now you have Cosme and Wiley at guards, and the line looks and sounds dramatically different.
Right.
But
you can plug right in right away. Whereas if you take, say, the kid Broderick Jones, I don't know that he would. You have to move Leno, and like it makes a whole different.
Yeah. I don't think he was a guy
more important, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I like beyond that, there weren't any other tackles at that spot. I'm like, yeah, you should have picked him instead. No way. I think they made the right choice. Like, I like Forbes a lot. He's very skinny, but I like what he offers. And I think, they needed what he offers. So
turnovers.
Yeah. And he also, he's a smart player. And one thing I like about the secondary, I think it's a smart overall. I think it's a very smart secondary. Kendall Fuller, St-Juste, I know Jeremy Reeves isn't a starter. He's super smart. Like Cam Curl, like those guys, I think all those guys have a high level of intelligence. And I don't know, and I talked about this in the podcast recently, but I don't know that they have like necessarily a Pro Bowl player among them at this point, because Cam hasn't made one. I think he's a very good safety. But I think collectively, you can do a lot with the group that's versatile and smart.
Two more for you before we get out of here. You brought up Forbes, assuming he starts day one on the outside. Who starts on the other side? Fuller, to me, can't go back into the slot. I'm not a big fan of St-Juste in the slot. Feels like he needs the boundary. Who ends up starting, Kendall Fuller or St-Juste, opposite of Forbes on the other side?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I will say, I'm going to answer it this way. When they go to a 3-corner set, then I think St-Juste does go inside, because for the reason you said. And I know they liked him in there, and there's a lot they can. The short answer is I would guess that St-Juste would be on the outside with him if it's just a two corner set. And then again, if you're going 3, you want your 3 best corners. There you go, and you can put St-Juste inside, because I don't really think the other 2 belong inside. And I know Kendall played there years ago, but when he last played there, it wasn't his strength. And I think with St-Juste, he does give you like, that's what, if it had worked with William Jackson, then St-Juste is playing inside, because they liked his length in there. He has really good short area quickness. I think that's all legit. I think he's a good outside corner. So I would agree with you there. But in this setup, now in camp, in training camp or mini camp, they would use Rashad Wildgoose inside there. Now you also have Quan Martin who can play inside there. So how do you do that? And when do you put him in there? What packages do you create for that, where you have Quan Martin in the slot versus one of the other guys? Because you don't want to have, they do like St-Juste a lot, so you don't want him on the sidelines. And they feel like Kendall Fuller in their zone match is a really good fit on the outside. So that's why I think he would stay out there, and you put St-Juste inside, and he showed that he can do it. I think some of those plays he made, like the play he made against the Bears and to save that game, is an example of that short area quickness that you need inside there. And again, the length helps. He's not, you typically think of like you covering these little quick guys, but that he has an advantage in there because he does move well inside, and he does have that length, which makes it a little bit tougher. But yeah, so that's kind of how I would see. That's how I would see it right now.
Amazingly, they spent 3rd and 4th round picks, generally guys you like to see start, on guys that I don't think have any chance of starting this year. What does that say about Ron Rivera, a guy who needs to win right away? that God bless him, he's still looking to the future. It's one of the things he's done as GM and head coach that I think he's done well. It's a hard thing to mesh the two because the two jobs are totally polar opposites, right? Like one guy's job is to set the team up for the future. One guy's job is to win right now. Those third and fourth picks were interesting.
I would agree with that. And now I will say, I think Ricky Stromberg, first of all, in their minds, like first round pick, you've got to start. Second round pick, you become a starter. Third round pick, you eventually become a starter. So but you have to, but the idea is you do contribute early on. Now, Ricky Stromberg, the center, if all goes well, he doesn't play because that means Nick Gates is staying healthy and producing. But I think they've been burned so much, and Rivera in particular have been burned a lot, or feeling that burn of the center injuries the last couple of years and not having anybody that is like you. I think they just wanted a young body who, could be there and develop into that guy. And so like they wanted the depth there because they used 5 guys, 6 guys there each of the last couple of years. Like how many teams go through that? So I think in their minds, like that is fresh. So I think, so I understand that pick very well. But yes, but the funny thing is, Doug, they talk a lot about position flexibility. And I thought when they drafted Stromberg, well, do they also view him as a guard? And it's like, he really has been working at center and that's it. And so it kind of goes against that topic, but I like adding depth on the line, and they now have a good, potentially good young center behind the starter. But if all goes well with Gates, he doesn't play from scrimmage. And, if Gates does well, he may not play for a couple of years, but you have that guy in your system, right? So, but how often does it always all go well for any offensive line? So you have that guy there. Daniels is a little bit more interesting because I personally view him as a little bit more of a project. I don't view Stromberg as a project. I view a guy that, if he has to go in and play this year, I think he can. So you are covered there. And again, the chances are he's going to play because, again, I think anybody who's watched this offensive line, not just Washington's offensive line over the last 10 years knows they're going to have injuries. They always do, right? So you want that depth. With Daniels, I know they're working him at tackle. I don't think he could go in right now and play there.
Yep.
I don't think he's ready to play there, but they don't need him to play right now because you have Cornelius Lucas. Will he be your first option going in, not Daniels? I think Daniels, they look at as a guy who has the athleticism to play the position. So they're going to try him out there. And then if he doesn't work there, you can move him inside. I think ultimately, personally, just watching the college film and all that, I think that's probably where he'll end up. But, take a shot and just see. So, and they also have Trent Scott, a veteran tackle, if he makes the roster. So you would have a few guys ahead of him. So you don't need him to come in right away. Now, should you take a 4th round guy like that? Well, he's got the athletic ability to develop into something that would go higher if he hits. So you get an intriguing young prospect in your system at one of those spots. And again, whether it's guard or tackle, eventually that's what it'll be. But when you watch him, like, I think he needs some work to be able, like, if he had to go into a game this year, I'd have a little bit different feeling with him than with Stromberg, because I view Stromberg as further ahead and ready to contribute. I don't think Daniels, give him time. I mean, he just got here. And so what you're watching in the spring is a continuation of what you saw in the fall, right? So how does he progress throughout the season? Morgan Moses was a 3rd round pick, and came in and had some struggles early, even in practice, and then he got better. But Moses is a very, very smart player. And so can Daniels can he grow at the same pace? If he does, then you have a guy who could be a solid player at one of the tackle spots, right? But he's got some things to learn, bends a lot, he has good feet, but he needs to use them better. But if he doesn't hit there, he hits inside. But yeah, so I don't think you don't draft a guy in the 4th round expecting him to come in and start. You would like to see him be a contributor, but you need to develop them as well. And so I think, but to your point about Rivera, because it would have been easy to go. There are a couple of tackles who say, well, this guy's more ready right now. Get him now. What, whether it's DeJuan Jones or someone like that. I think that also goes back to quarterback. Like, you have a coach who and I'm intrigued by Sam Howell. I think he has the traits where he can be a good quarterback. We don't know when that will happen. We don't know if that'll happen. We all have our opinions based on what we've seen, but nobody knows for sure because he's still a mystery, and that's okay. But in your year 4 of your system, how many guys where you need to win, how many guys will be willing to roll the dice with him? And I always tell people that should also give you pause as to what they think about him. Like, this is year 4. He has to win, and he's rolling with Sam Howell. What does that tell you what they think about him? But it's also a move where you'd say, like, if it was year 2, you wouldn't bat an eye. But it's year 4.
Right.
You need to win. You're in a tough division, and this is what you're going to do. So but I think that's like good for now, could be good for now, but really could be really good for the future. And it may be somebody else who benefits. If they don't have the kind of year you have, but Howell shows well, then some other coach could benefit from that. Whereas if they had gone out and gotten a Derek Carr and given up a lot for him, all in an effort to win now, where does it leave the franchise down the road? Because now you're talking about you're not keeping all those, you probably, if you go out and get Derek Carr, you probably don't have Daron Payne. You probably, maybe you can't sign both, but you may lose a Cam Curl and 1 or 2 or the defensive ends, whatever. There's a trickle down, right? But it would be all in an effort to win right now, because right now, would Derek Carr be better? Would you think going into the season, who are people going to say be better, Carr or Howell? Well, Carr, because we know who he is. Now, at the end of the season, maybe you say it differently because we've seen more of Howell. But the point is, like, that would be a win now move. They didn't do that. And so, for a lot of reasons, but I think it set them up better for the future. So yeah, you're right. Like, that's usually when you have coaches in charge, you don't get that sort of thinking. And even I'll go one more for, Eric Bieniemy. It's a different system. This is a different system. So now, again, you have a young quarterback with a different system with a new coordinator, and you have some new coaches on that staff. You have to win now. That's a transition. I really like that hire. And the more we're around Bieniemy, the more I like it. But there's also a transition. And in going into year 4, it is a roll of the dice. But I think it's one that can pay off much more so than if you had gone the Pat Shurmur route, well, you kind of know what you're going to get, right? And you could have kept the same system, but you also know, like, is this going to be the best to grow with? Like, so I think some of those moves are moves like this. Again, if this was year 2, you'd say, like, oh, okay, this is where you have to go. It's year 4. So you have to win, but yet these are the moves you're making. But I think they're necessary moves. And I do like the Howell thing. Like, I am intrigued by this kid because, last year in training camp, the start of camp, you just like, okay, he's clearly not ready. And you wouldn't see it, but he progressed. By the end of camp, you're like, all right, this kid got better. Now, he wasn't threatening the other 2 at that point, but he got better. I think you always notice when guys get better because, like, you only get better if you're first of all, if you're pretty good, but also, like, if you're working on a lot of things that you need to get better at, right? The timing was a little bit better. And if footwork still needed a lot of work, and that's something that's sometimes hard. Like, if you're a reporter, you don't always know the rhythm of the plays. You can tell when a guy throws in rhythm, hit the back, boom, boom. I remember talking to D'Angelo Hall about one time. He's like, how can you tell when a quarterback's getting? He's like, when your quarterback's getting it. He said, well, you hit that plant step, ball's coming out. And so you watch for that stuff. But you don't always know, are they making the right decisions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you saw the improvement, and you saw the improvement when he went in. So I get it with him. Like, I'm intrigued by him. But again, it is not necessarily a win now mentality move. Yeah. But again, I would tell people, well, what does that tell you what they think about him? Now, Jacoby Brissett's great insurance, but what does it tell you if you're rolling with Howell, they know they have to win. What do you think that says about what they feel about him? So,
of course, to your point, they've swung every year and weren't able to get in there. Was there anything other than Carr? There wasn't much to swing at.
There wasn't anything.
Were they stuck with Howell? You know what I mean?
Listen,
Like,
you can easily make that case, right? And then and I think that's very fair. Could you have gone a different route? Are there some other veterans that you could have pursued? Jimmy Garoppolo, they liked him the previous year. I tend to believe if he had not had the health issues that he would have been here instead of Carson Wentz.
Okay.
That's just a gut feel more than anything else. And so you could have gone that route, but the health issues, right? That it's not conducive to can you trust the health, right? So like there were a couple of things you could have gone. Maybe you be more aggressive in the draft going after one of these quarterbacks if you wanted to, and at least say, well, it's a first round guy. Well, maybe he's not, Will Levis. Yeah. So, but yes, I think that's part of it too. And I do think I also will say, like, and you have to always bring up the money with Sam Howell, and that they love the fact that you may have a young quarterback on that rookie contract that allows you to keep Daron Payne. It allows you to keep, to sign Montez Sweat and or Chase Young in the offseason and keep them around and keep that group together for at least a couple more years before a Howell contract is due, if it gets to that point. So, that was definitely part of it as well, but it doesn't mean they had to go with Howell. But I do think I think there are more guys who were available the year before who you would say are bigger names and potentially strong quarterbacks. I mean, Russell Wilson and, all these guys they inquired about who had questions about them. Right. So there were more options than there were this year, and Carr was available, but that they were not in on him. And, and I personally, I think the cost was way too high for Carr, both in money and compensate, if they'd had to have traded for him, for example, but even with the money, I'm like, I don't know that he gets you to where you need to go paying him that much and then not being able to do X, Y, and Z because of it. So, but yeah, I think that's part of it, Doug. Yep.
John, always wrap like this. What advice would you give to young folks out there that are looking to be the next John Keim? What could you tell for them?
Oh, find a better person to emulate. That's what I would say. I think if you want, and I get, because Doug, I do get that from people like, I want to do what you do. And then I explain how I got here. And they're like, oh, you're not rolling out of bed and saying, I want to cover an NFL team. And I think people understand that. I think the hard part, there's a couple of things. First of all, you have to be persistent and you have to develop habits early on that carry you through. You don't get here and start working a certain way. You work a certain way to get here. And then you maintain that because you have to. Because if you don't, I don't take for granted that because I've done this a long time that I can somehow ever coast. You can't. The minute you do that, then, they're like Nicky Javala, Sam Fortier, Ben Stanig, all these folks on the beat are going to zoom right past you. And not that I'm ahead of them, but you're right here. You want to stay in this mix. Right. So you have to work a certain way, because if I don't, I know how good this group is. Right. And they're all talented journalists. And I'm left out names, Michael Phillips. I mean, Matt Parris, all these guys are out there. And so Pete Haley, JP, everybody. So, that's one thing, is you have to establish habits early on that carry you through. And so that's one. Learn how to develop relationships. That's the key to this business, is how do you develop a relationship? Because that's what helps you get access, information, and just, it's a relationship business, man. You have to be able to do that. And I think the other thing is, and this is where it's hard, that you have to be willing to do a lot of different things. I worked for the Journal newspapers, which was a suburban daily in DC, but it allowed me, and I covered high schools for the first 5 years of my career. And, first of all, it teaches you a little bit about humility. I was covering crew. I covered field hockey. I covered softball, right? I was covering things when I was at Ohio State, I'm covering the men's basketball team. And that's what I love to do. So and not that I certainly wasn't embarrassed to cover that. I covered field hockey and I covered high school baseball for years. I took the same approach to covering high school baseball that I do to covering this team. And I never realized that until I looked back on it, that like, oh, the same mentality that I use here, I'm using now. Because that's just, it has to be who you are. But I think it teaches you humility. And with that humility comes, you're willing to do whatever. You have to be willing to do whatever. And you can sometimes see with young reporters that maybe they don't always have that. And they don't understand. It's not true with everybody, but like, if you talk to people who've traveled the route I have or similar, then there's a little bit of a difference with that. So you have to be willing to go wherever, work, learn your craft, take some chances, with your writing, learn how to be a reporter. And I think you can learn how I'll be honest. Like, I think it was tougher covering high school as far as like writing the tough stories, because it deals with high school athletics, whether it's, coaches, administrators, kids, parents, whatever, like some tougher stories, news stories that involve like underage drinking, things like that. Like, you're dealing with a lot different emotion when you're writing about those kind of things. And it's a lot harder. So when you go through that and you get to the NFL, it's like, well, these guys are getting paid. They're all getting paid a lot to be here. So it's not quite as difficult, I would say. Right. But it's because you had that. And there's just so many skills you develop in the so-called minor leagues that help you when you get up there. Now, I know a lot of people who've gone from wherever covering the NFL at a young age do a very good job, and they have a strong work ethic and all that. I mean, Sam Fortier is a young kid, does a really good job, right? So, but I do think, like, so if you want to do that, like, you have to be willing to do that. You're not just going to write a blog item and have everybody think, oh my God, that's a great blog, let's hire him. That's not how it works. Be a reporter somewhere. Learn how to be a reporter, because that's what people want, and focus on that. Listen to good interviews from people. Learn how to interview people, right? Do all those little things. But the sad thing is that you don't have as many of those opportunities because of, there aren't as many local papers. But if you can find one, develop your voice there and learn how to work the craft there, and be aggressive. Like, if you're in college, be aggressive looking for internships. Be aggressive calling people and, asking to do you need any extra work, right? Anything, just to get professional clips. So there you go. And there's a lot, and it's also so different of a journalism world from when I grew up in it, that it's hard, because I have to think now, it's what I did, but I also have to apply it to how it is now. Can you go cover high schools for a local? Well, they don't all do that. They don't all have that option now, so what can you do instead to get there? And so, it's difficult, but there are outlets, like, you can still do stuff online and you can still get good clips. And the other thing is, and it's funny, because I had somebody recently sent me their clips and this stuff they sent on their resume. And like, one of them was like a news story was compiled off of tweets. Like, that's not a news story. You're taking someone else's stuff. If you go out and find that news story and include that, always I'm sorry, I'm rambling on with this, but it's passionate of mine, but always make the extra phone call, always include the extra voice in a story, because it always makes it better. If you only have a couple voices, find more, because then you get, like, it's, if you want, a story is like it's a ball of clay, and the better and more clay you have, the more of a structure you can make, and a better piece of art you can make with the more you have. And that's one of the things that I learned covering high school baseball. I would always get paranoid way back in the day before cell phones. So you'd have to call the coaches at the schools, and you would call them, and like, you'd have to call by 9, because if they didn't get the message by 9, they may not call you back for a long time. If you get it in by 9, you could get a call back maybe within a couple hours. Well, if I didn't get callbacks right away, I got paranoid. So then I'd call 5 more people. And next thing you know, instead of a 4-person notebook item or something, I'd have a 9-item notebook, because I got so many calls back. But you use that same approach in a story, like, oh my God, I don't have enough. I need more. Getting more is never bad. You can always cut. And I think it's harder to cut a story, because you always feel like you have so much good stuff, than it is to add if you don't have the stuff. So always, always, always find the extra voices for any story. Sorry, I rambled on that one, but that's
No.
you hit it in the wheelhouse there, Doug.
That was great. John, we had talked about doing 20 minutes. We're up on 50 minutes. I can't thank you enough for doing this.
Well, that's my problem. I talk a lot.
Hey, listen, I would have done it for another hour. So, I mean, I really appreciate your time today. This was a lot of fun for me.
My pleasure, Doug. I'm glad we finally connected.
All right. Thank you, John.